You have felt it before you knew its name, that strange pull toward something you cannot quite recall. It arrives in moments of stillness, when the noise of the world loosens its grip, and a thread of memory, impossibly ancient, brushes against the edges of your mind. What if you were not learning for the first time? What if every truth you've ever discovered was not an arrival, but a return? And what if the very act of remembering was the key to escaping the weight of forgetting that binds you to this world? And in remembering, you may finally step beyond the illusions that have quietly shaped your life since the moment you first opened your eyes. By the end of this journey, you will see how the soul's most secret treasure, knowledge carried from before you were born, Anamnesis pure wide you right, can be uncovered in the quiet chambers of thought. You will not only understand this ancient truth, but feel its impact in your daily life, freeing you from fears, doubts, and limits you never realized were not yours to carry. You will understand why philosophers, mystics, and seekers across the ages spoke of learning as a kind of awakening, a lifting of the veil over the mind's inner light. Welcome, seeker of forgotten truths. You step now into a dialogue older than history itself, a conversation between the eternal soul and the fleeting body, between the silence before birth and the echoes of the present. In the teachings of Plato, Anamnesis is the name for that hidden current, running beneath the river of thought, the belief that all learning is recollection, that what you come to know is what your soul has always known. It is the gentle but unyielding claim that truth is not discovered in the world outside, but uncovered from the depths within. Imagine yourself in the dusty air of an Athenian courtyard where Socrates questions a young boy, a boy with no schooling, no training in geometry, and yet, with only carefully placed questions, the boy reconstructs a perfect mathematical truth. To those who watched, it was a marvel. To Socrates, it was proof. The boy had not been taught. He had remembered. This was not mere cleverness. It was a window into the soul's past life, a life before life, when it traveled in the company of the divine, beholding perfect forms, beauty untouched by decay, justice unclouded by compromise, equality unblemished by measure. In that place, beyond the wheel of birth and death, you knew these truths as clearly as you now know the taste of water or the warmth of sunlight on your skin. But then came the fall into the body, and with it the forgetting. Your senses became your prison guards, offering shadows in place of light, illusions in place of truth. And yet, deep in the marrow of your being, the shapes of those eternal truths remain. They wait for the moment you will turn inward and ask not, "What is this?" but, "What have I forgotten?" Even now, in the quiet spaces between thoughts, you feel the echo of a knowing that cannot be explained by books or teachers. It's like hearing a childhood lullaby in a crowded station, or catching the smell of bread your grandmother once baked. Instant, undeniable, and impossible to explain. It stirs when you encounter an idea that feels less like news and more like recognition. It moves when you hear a melody you swear you have known all your life, though you could not have heard it before. This is the beginning of Anamnesis, the subtle shift from seeking truth to remembering it. Have you ever felt this yourself? That sudden moment when something new feels anciently familiar? Share it. Your story may awaken another. It is a reversal of the normal path of learning. The eyes no longer hunt outward. The soul listens inward. And in that listening, you reclaim the fragments of what was once whole. But to remember is not without danger. The world you inhabit is built on forgetting. Its rhythms, its demands, its endless parade of distractions are designed to anchor you to the present moment, not as awareness, but as amnesia. If you begin to recall what lies beyond, you threaten the order of things. For to know your origin is to loosen the chains of every false identity that has been placed upon you. So you begin to walk the thin line between the comfort of the known and the calling of the forgotten. Every question you ask in earnest becomes a key. Every honest doubt a crack in the prison wall. And with each fracture, light seeps in from a place you did not know you had left. Not just light, but the faint scent of rain on stone, the texture of worn parchment beneath your fingertips, the low hum of something ancient stirring. The philosophers of ancient Greece did not see this as mysticism alone. They saw it as the highest function of reason, to lead the mind back to its own source. Philosophy, in its truest form, was not the building of arguments, but the dismantling of illusions. It was a sacred craft of remembrance, a turning of the soul away from shadows and toward the forms it once beheld without fear. You are not simply a body that thinks. You are a soul that has been thinking since before the stars above you were born. The task is not to gather more thoughts, but to recognize the ones that have been waiting for you to notice them again. And yet, this is only the threshold. The deeper you go into this remembering, the more you will see that the forgetting was not an accident, but part of a greater descent. A descent that was meant to be reversed, but only by your own awakening. The first key has been placed in your hand. The lock it opens is not on the world around you, but on the gate between your present self and the self that walked among eternal things. You wake to find yourself in a world that greets you as its own, a world that tells you its stories, hands you its names, and dresses you in roles you never remember choosing. But somewhere, deep within, a quieter voice insists, this is not where you began. You sit across from the Gnostic now, their eyes alight with secrets as they lean in to tell you why. The Gnostic would tell you why. They would speak of a place before all places, a fullness, a radiant expanse beyond time, a horizon painted in deep indigo, scattered with silver fire, beneath which crystalline waters flow in silence, the realm they called the Pleroma. There, your essence was not a fragment, but a spark within the infinite flame. You were not separated, not striving, not searching for your origin, because your origin, and then the descent, not a fall of distance, but of density. Your light clothed itself in matter, each layer dimming the memory of where you had come from. You entered the current of the world, and with each turning of the seasons, The river of forgetting deepened. In this forgetting, you became a stranger to yourself. The mirror showed you a face, but not the one you remembered. The voice that spoke through your lips sounded like yours, but it carried the accents of the prison you had been born into. The Gnostic calls this condition the sleep of the soul. You walk and speak, but you do not yet remember what it means to be alive in truth. Then comes the messenger, not always in the form you expect. Sometimes a teacher, sometimes a fragment of scripture, sometimes a dream so vivid you awaken in tears. Their purpose is not to give you new knowledge, but to awaken the knowledge you have always had. They do not fill the cup. They shake the dust from the water within it. This is Anamnesis in its Gnostic form, not the recovery of abstract ideas, but the recognition of yourself as a being of divine origin who has wandered into exile. To remember is to rebel against the illusion that this exile is your home. Yet this remembering is no simple act. The rulers of the material realm, the archons, would have you remain forgetful, not as mythic tyrants in some far-off sky, but as the subtle patterns of thought, the habits of distraction, the seductive comforts that keep your gaze turned away from the inner light. They weave the net of daily necessity, and each strand whispers, "Stay asleep. The dream is all there is." But within the Hermetic tradition, another voice answers. It tells you that even here, in the very heart of illusion, you are never truly cut off from the source. You may have turned your face away from the sun, but the sun still shines upon you. Hermetic teachings call you to reversal, to turn back from the senses and ascend through the layers of the self. This is not an escape from the world, but a reorientation within it. You begin by contemplating the patterns in nature, the spirals of a shell, the order of the stars, until you see them as reflections of a greater order that once surrounded you completely. In this way, the outer becomes a mirror of the inner, and the microcosm speaks the language of the macrocosm. You drink from the cup of mind, not with lips, but with attention, filling yourself with the remembrance that every living thing is a fragment of the divine mind. The world's multiplicity was never meant to conceal unity, but to express it in 1,000 shapes. And yet, you cannot see this until you remember it. The Hermetic path does not promise comfort. To remember is to shed the illusions that once protected you from the vastness of truth. The old certainties about who you are, why you are here, begin to crack, and through those cracks flows a light that cannot be dimmed. You may feel disoriented, as if the ground beneath you has shifted. You may grieve for the self you thought you were, but in that grief, a deeper clarity begins to rise. You recall, not in words, not in images, but in a sudden recognition that you have known this all along, that the path you walk now is the return to a home you have never left, because it has always been within you. And still, this is only the second veil lifted. Beyond it lie others, woven through centuries of thought and faith. Some will try to shape the remembering into a doctrine, others into a warning. And in the centuries after Plato, voices would rise from within the Christian tradition, each grappling with the dangerous promise of a soul that could remember its life before life. But for now, you stand in the quiet aftermath of revelation. The Gnostic has reminded you that you are a stranger here only because you have forgotten. The Hermetic has shown you that remembering is the bridge back to wholeness. But before you decide, let us pause. Breathe. Feel the stillness after the storm of revelations, like standing in a temple just after the chanting has ceased, when the air still trembles with the sound. The question remains, will you walk further into this remembering, knowing that every step draws you away from the world as it is, and toward a truth that cannot be unseen? You have seen how philosophers and mystics whispered of a memory older than the body, a knowing that did not begin in this life. But what happens when such a claim enters the realm of faith, where truths are guarded by doctrine and boundaries are set by councils and creeds? In the centuries after Plato, new voices rose, the voices of those who followed. They inherited a world steeped in Greek thought, yet they carried a message of their own, the soul's salvation through the living God. For some, the idea of Anamnesis was not a threat, but a gift. Clement of Alexandria looked upon Greek philosophy as a torch lit in the darkness before the dawn of Christ. To him, the teachings of Plato could prepare the soul to hear the gospel, for what Christ offered was not entirely new. It was the awakening of what the soul had always known of God. Origen went further still. He spoke of souls dwelling with God before birth, falling into the world through the misuse of freedom. The soul, he taught, once saw the good so clearly that to behold it again would be to leave ignorance forever. In this way, Christ was not merely a savior from sin, but the revealer of a forgotten vision, the one who calls the soul back to the memory of God. But this was a dangerous road. If the soul existed before birth, if it had known God from the beginning, then what need was there for creation as described? For a single, unrepeatable act of birth? What place would remain for the authority of those who claimed to hold the keys of truth? The centuries turned, and the councils met. By the 6th century, the teaching of pre-existence was condemned. The memory of the soul before birth was sealed behind the iron doors of heresy. You could speak of remembering God, but only in the language of faith's present moment, never as a return to something you had known in another life. And so, in the realm of Christendom, Anamnesis became a symbol, a liturgical act in the breaking of bread, a remembrance not of your own eternal past, but of a single sacred history. The Eucharists, "Do this in remembrance of me," was no longer an unlocking of the soul's ancient memory, but a ritual of devotion to the story of salvation. Yet outside the walls of the Western Church, the idea lived on, woven into other traditions like threads from the same invisible loom. In the East, the sages of India spoke of samti, a remembrance, not as the recall of events, but as the recognition of the self's unity with the eternal. In the stillness of meditation, you are told to remember your true nature, to strip away the false identifications, until only the Atman remains, the self that is not separate from Brahman. In the forests and monasteries of Buddhism, the word sati held a similar key. It meant mindfulness, but at its heart lay the act of remembering, calling to mind what has always been, recalling the truths uncovered by the awakened ones of the past, even the Buddha's own journey, tracing back through countless lives, was a vast anamnesis, a memory so deep it pierced the veil of death itself. And in the gatherings of the Sufis, the remembrance of God, Tikar, was not a mere repetition of sacred names, but the rhythmic knocking on the locked door of the heart. With each breath, the seeker called themselves home, until the one who remembered and the one remembered were no longer two. These parallels were not born of imitation. They were the echoes of a single truth, resonating across cultures and centuries. That, to know yourself truly, is to remember what the world has taught you to forget. You begin to see a pattern wherever this teaching appears. It challenges the surface order of life. It tells you that no teacher, no temple, no book can give you what you do not already hold. It tells you that the sacred is not a distant light you must chase, but the flame already burning in your own depths. And this is the tension. To awaken to that truth is to see through the structures built upon your forgetfulness. It is to find that the keys to your own prison were in your hand the whole time, but such knowing cannot be forced upon you. It arrives like a tide at night, lifting you quietly from the shore you thought was home. You may resist, clinging to the familiar land of names and roles, or you may let go and allow the current to carry you toward a horizon you dimly recall, a horizon you have been sailing toward since before you were born. And yet, this too is not the end. The memory may awaken, but the question remains: how do you live in the world once you have remembered? Do you speak of it openly, risking the disbelief of those still asleep? Or do you guard it like a hidden flame, feeding it in silence until it becomes the fire that will burn away every shadow? You live in an age that believes it has mapped the boundaries of the mind. Science tells you where memory is stored, how it is formed, how it can fade or fracture. Yet for all its instruments, it has not found a place where the most important memories sleep, in quiet corners of the modern world. The old idea has returned in new garments. Theosophists speak of the soul as a traveler through many lives, carrying the wisdom of centuries, like a seed hidden in the soil. They say that when you learn something profound, it is not the first time. It is the seed beginning to grow again. This seed has been described in countless cultures: the spark of divinity in Gnosticism, the body seed in Buddhism, the fitra in Islam, all pointing to a shared human inheritance. New Age healers speak of the Akashic records, a great archive beyond space and time, where every thought, word, and action is written in the light. To them, Anamnesis is the reading of this record, a descent into the library of the soul, to recall what was written long before your current name. Psychologists, too, have touched its edges. though they call it by other names. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, ancient images that rise, unbidden, from the collective unconscious. To him, these were not memories of events, but memories of form, the shared architecture of human thought. And in the philosophy of mind, there is still debate over the nature of knowledge itself. Plato's claim that all learning is recollection finds strange company with the idea of innate ideas, that some truths are built into you before you open your eyes for the first time. Others reject this entirely, arguing that you begin as a blank slate, written upon by the hand of experience. But if that were so, why do some things feel like home the first time you encounter them? Across these modern landscapes, rituals and techniques have emerged, promising to awaken the memory that hides beneath the noise. Guided regressions lead you into shadowed hallways of the mind, where you meet faces and places that feel impossibly familiar. Meditations slow the breath until the chatter of the present dissolves, and the mind slips into a vast interior space, as if walking into a temple you have visited 1,000 times before. Some initiatory traditions still carry the older forms. They dress the seeker in symbols, lead them blindfolded into chambers of darkness, and speak words whose meaning is half-veiled. You are asked to die to the life you know, to step into the underworld, and emerge reborn. In that rebirth, you are told not what to believe, but what you have always known. Even in the simplest acts of devotion, the principle lives on, a mantra repeated until its sound dissolves into silence, a candle lit at the same hour each night, a walk taken in solitude, your steps in rhythm with your breath. These are all forms of calling yourself back, of tapping the inner shoulder and saying, "Remember." Yet, in the modern age, the act of remembering is often tangled with illusion. Not every vivid image is a truth from before your birth. The mind can create as easily as it can recall. It can weave stories from fragments, project meaning onto coincidence. The danger now is not that you will forget, but that you will mistake the dream for the memory. This is why the ancient paths insisted on discipline. Not all recollections are sacred. Not all visions are the voice of the soul. To remember truly, you must strip away desire and fear, until what remains is the simple recognition of what has always been. And when that moment comes, it is rarely dramatic. There is no lightning, no voice from the heavens. It comes like the quiet turning of a key in a lock, like the slow opening of a door you did not realize was closed. You step through, and the room beyond feels like home, not because it is new, but because it is the place you left so long ago. The challenge now is not in finding the key, but in using it without retreat. For once you have crossed that threshold, the world you return to will not look the same. You will see the patterns behind the patterns, the echoes behind the words, and you will know that forgetting was never a complete loss. It was the shadow that gave remembering its power. But still, a final question waits. just beyond your reach. If the memory is yours alone, what is the thread that connects it to the memories of others? Why do strangers from distant lands speak of the same inner landscapes, the same lost light? Perhaps the last part of this journey will not be about remembering for yourself alone, but about finding the point where all memory converges, where the soul's private knowing and the world's hidden story become the same truth. You have walked through the philosophies of the ancients, the visions of mystics, the rituals of seekers who dared to remember. Now you stand in an age that measures truth with instruments and data, an age that listens only to what can be repeated in a lab. Science tells you the brain is the house of memory, billions of neurons, electrical signals mapping the moments of your life. It tells you that memory begins with the senses, that before your first breath, there is only a blank page, and yet it cannot explain why some things feel as if you have known them forever. Neuroscience offers its own shadows of anamnesis. It speaks of instincts, the newborn turning toward the sound of a voice, the infant's fascination with faces, the fear of heights that no experience has taught. It points to inherited patterns, perhaps carried in the structure of your genes, echoes of survival written in your very cells. These are not the memories of a soul's journey, but they are proof that not all knowing comes from experience alone. Psychology, too, seeks its answer. It warns of false memory, how suggestion can plant an image in your mind until you swear it was lived. It speaks of cryptomnesia, where something you once heard long ago returns to you without its source, and you believe it your own creation. The mind, it says, is a master of making the past from fragments, and yet there are moments that refuse to be dismissed. Children who speak of places they have never seen, languages they have never learned, faces they have never met, and yet describe them with impossible detail. Skeptics explain, believers nod knowingly, but the mystery remains. In the halls of academia, the debate turns back to philosophy. Was Plato's Anamnesis ever meant to be literal, or was it a metaphor for the way the mind recognizes truth, because it is built to do so? Perhaps the before is not another life, but the architecture of thought itself, the deep grammar of the universe, written into the mind. You begin to see that the argument between the mystic and the scientist may not be a battle, but two ways of speaking about the same thing. One says soul, the other says structure. One says memory before birth, the other says innate cognition. Both are reaching toward the same light, though they name it differently. In this, you find a strange comfort. Whether the memory is eternal or encoded, whether it belongs to the soul or the synapse, it is still yours to awaken. The act of remembering, of turning inward until the noise falls away, still holds the power to change you. But here is the danger you must face. Once you begin to remember, you cannot unknow. The truths you uncover will follow you, even into your sleep. They will color the way you see others, the way you hear the news, the way you stand in silence under the stars. You will feel the weight of choice more heavily, for you will know you are choosing not only for now, but in the shadow of everything you have ever been. So you stand before the last door. It is not locked. It does not need to be. Most turn away before they reach for the handle, content to live in the soft forgetting. That makes the world bearable. If you choose to open it, you may find nothing there, only the quiet truth that this life is all there is. Or you may find that beyond the threshold is the light you have been chasing. In every face, every book, every prayer, the choice is yours. You can stay in the well-lit room of the known, or you can step into the dim corridor, where the air smells faintly of somewhere you cannot name, where each step echoes like a voice you almost recognize, where, in the distance, a door waits that has been waiting since before you were born. You place your hand upon it, and just before you turn the handle, a question rises from the deepest part of you, the question that has brought you here, through centuries of thought and belief, through the gates of forgetting and back again. And perhaps the answer has been waiting in every sunrise you have ever seen, in every stranger's smile that felt like home, in every dream that carried you farther than sleep should allow. When I remember at last, will I find that I have returned to myself, or to something far greater that has been remembering me all along? If you wish to keep walking these hidden paths with me, where history, mystery, and the soul meet, subscribe now and let us remember together.